Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? This time, we're heading back to the ancient world, to a time when a resurgent Persia, led by the enigmatic Artaxerxes, was about to clash with the might of Rome.
Buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride.
It always is, right? So, picture this. It's the 3rd century A.D. The Roman Empire, well, it's starting to show some cracks, and on their eastern border, this powerful new Persian dynasty is rising. At the helm, Artaxerxes.
Yeah, Artaxerxes. He's a fascinating figure, and our guide for this journey is, of course, Edward Gibbon and his masterpiece, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire.
We're going to be digging into Chapter 8 specifically to uncover how this all unfolded. Ambition, religious fervor, epic battles, it's all there.
It really has it all.
Yeah, Gibbon, he starts by describing Rome's internal struggles at the time, kind of contrasting them with stories of these, quote, barbarians.
Right, the barbarians at the gates.
Exactly. And it seems like while Rome was dealing with its own issues, figures like Artaxerxes, they saw an opportunity.
And Artaxerxes? Well, he was more than ready to seize it. I mean, even his origins are shrouded in mystery.
Yeah. Like, was he really this humble tanner's son who defied all odds? Or was he secretly a descendant of Persian royalty, destined to reclaim his throne?
Gibbon kind of plays with both possibilities, which honestly just makes him even more intriguing.
It's like a legend come to life.
Yeah.
But what's not up for debate? His military genius. This guy overthrew the Parthians, boom, 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 3 decisive battles in quick succession, established the Sassanid dynasty just like that.
And then, to make his ambitions absolutely clear, he takes the title King of Kings.
King of Kings.
A title that harked back to those ancient Persian emperors like Cyrus the Great. It was a statement. He wasn't just aiming for regional power. Artaxerxes wanted to restore Persia to its former glory as a global superpower.
But military power, it was only part of the equation.
Right.
To truly unify Persia, he needed something more, something to bind people together, give them a shared purpose, a driving force.
And that's where Zoroastrianism comes in.
This ancient Persian religion, it was kind of in decline at the time.
But Artaxerxes saw its potential. He knew that a unified faith could be just as powerful as a unified army.
And so he orchestrated this incredible revival. Gibbon tells this amazing story. About 80,000 Magi Zoroastrian priests gathered from every corner of the empire. I mean, can you imagine the logistics of that?
80,000. It's mind-boggling.
It is. And then they go through this elaborate selection process.
Whittling down the numbers, testing their knowledge, their piety.
Until finally only 7 remained.
The most learned, the most devout.
It's almost like a reality show for ancient priests, you know?
It kind of is, isn't it? But it wasn't just for show.
What was Artaxerxes doing with all of this?
He was consolidating his power, for sure. But he was also tapping into something deeper, something that resonated with the Persian people.
Their history, their identity.
Exactly. By reviving Zoroastrianism in such a dramatic way, he was sending a message. This wasn't just a change in dynasty. This was a national rebirth, a return to Persia's roots.
And then there's the story of Erdivaraf, this young priest, who drinks this special potion, falls into this prophetic dream, and emerges with, like, the core tenets of Zoroastrianism confirmed.
Talk about divine inspiration, right? Or maybe some well-timed stagecraft.
Right. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
But I think for some of our listeners, we might need to back up a bit. What exactly is Zoroastrianism?
Sure. It's an ancient religion, actually one of the oldest in the world. And at its heart, it's all about this dualistic struggle.
Dualistic?
Yeah, between good and evil, represented by Mazda.
Or Ormuzd.
Right, Ormuzd, and Ungramenu.
Yeah, well,
Ahriman, yeah. And this cosmic battle, it plays out in every aspect of life, from the fate of empires to the choices that we make every single day.
So it's like this cosmic game of tug of war, with good and evil constantly vying for dominance.
Exactly. And Zoroastrians believe that by choosing good, by living a righteous life, they're actively contributing to the fight against evil.
That's a pretty empowering idea, right?
It is, and what surprised me, reading Gibbon, was how progressive some aspects of Zoroastrianism were.
Yeah, especially for the ancient world.
Right.
There's that quote from the Zend-Avesta, the Zoroastrian sacred text, that really stood out to me. It says, "He who sows the ground with care and diligence acquires a greater stock of religious merit than he could gain by the repetition of 10,000 prayers."
It's a powerful statement.
It is. It's like they're saying, get out there, make a difference, work hard. Actions speak louder than words. That's pretty radical, even today.
Absolutely. And it reflects this emphasis on action, on good works. Zoroastrianism isn't just about rituals and ceremonies. It's about engaging with the world, making things better.
And Gibbon mentions this annual festival where the Persian king would break down social barriers, share a meal with farmers and laborers. It's like, can you imagine a king hanging out with everyday people?
It's a pretty remarkable image.
It is. It tells us something about their values, right? About the interconnectedness of society.
Exactly. Everyone has a role to play in this fight against evil, from the king down to the farmer.
So interesting, all of this. And I think it sets the stage for what we're going to be diving into in the next part of our deep dive.
The clash of these two titans, Persia, revitalized and ready for war, and Rome,
Well, a little preoccupied, maybe.
let's just say Rome had its hands full. But we'll get into all of that after the break.
Stay tuned. So we've got this newly unified Persia, driven by religious fervor, led by this ambitious king who's revived an ancient faith. What happens next?
Well, emboldened by his success at home, Artaxerxes sets his sights on reclaiming lost Persian territories. And guess who happens to be occupying those territories?
Rome, of course. It was inevitable, right? This clash of empires.
It was a showdown centuries in the making. And Artaxerxes doesn't waste any time. He sends a message to the Roman Emperor Alexander Severus, essentially saying, get out of Asia. It belongs to Persia.
Talk about a power move. Can you imagine the audacity?
It was a direct challenge to Roman authority, a declaration that Persia was back on the world stage and ready to fight for its place. And to really drive the point home, Artaxerxes sends this incredibly lavish embassy to Alexander Severus.
Gibbon describes them flaunting their physical prowess, decked out in opulent attire, basically saying, look at us, we're back, and we're not messing around.
It was a calculated display of power and intimidation. They wanted to make it clear that this wasn't the same Persia Rome had dealt with before.
This was a new era, a Persia reborn. So how did Alexander Severus respond to this bold message?
Well, he wasn't about to back down. He gathered his legions and prepared for war.
And what followed was, well, it depends on who you ask, right?
Exactly. History, especially when it comes to wars, is often written by the victors.
The Roman accounts, they painted Alexander Severus as the decisive victor. Big surprise that, right?
Of course. But, as Gibbon points out, those accounts might need a healthy dose of skepticism.
So who should we believe then? Gibbon turns to another historian, Herodian, who's considered a bit more objective, let's say. What does Herodian tell us?
Well, according to Herodian, the Roman victories were far less impressive than they claimed. They might have won some battles, but at a heavy cost. And it was by no means the decisive victory the Romans were spinning.
So the lesson here is to always be critical of our sources.
Right.
Look at who's telling the story, their motivations, and then try to piece together the most likely scenario.
Exactly. Especially when we're dealing with ancient history where we often only have fragments of information, conflicting accounts, layers of interpretation to sift through.
It's like a giant puzzle where some of the pieces are missing. But even with these conflicting accounts, one thing is clear. Artaxerxes' reign, it was a turning point. He shifted the balance of power in the East, revived Persia, set it on this collision course with Rome, and he did all of this in just 14 years.
He died relatively young, but the impact of his reign was undeniable.
Gibbon includes this great quote from Artaxerxes that gives us a glimpse into his thinking. He said, "The authority of the prince must be defended by a military force. That force can only be maintained by taxes. All taxes must, at last, fall upon agriculture, and agriculture can never flourish except under the protection of justice and moderation."
It's remarkable how relevant that quote still is today.
It shows this deep understanding of how interconnected different parts of a society are. It's not just about military strength, but about economic stability, fairness, balance.
Artaxerxes understood that true power wasn't just about conquering territory, but about creating a thriving and sustainable society.
It's a lesson that a lot of leaders, even today, could learn from. But sadly, for Artaxerxes, his reign was cut short. And the torch, his ambitions for expansion, they passed on to his son, Sapor.
And with that, the stage was set for a centuries-long struggle between Rome and Persia for dominance in the East.
And this new Persian dynasty, the Sassanids, they were a force to be reckoned with. In fact, Gibbon spends some time comparing the Persians to the, quote, northern barbarians, who, much later, would overrun the Roman Empire. But he seems to suggest that the Persians were maybe not quite as...
Barbaric.
Yeah, maybe not as barbaric.
He points out that Persia had this long and rich history of civilization, sophistication. They weren't just these wild hordes descending from the north. They had complex social structures, a thriving culture of art, philosophy, literature.
But they did have a pretty formidable military, right? Like, weren't they the ones who once marched on Greece with millions of soldiers?
Their military tradition was certainly impressive, but Gibbon suggests that their military science wasn't as advanced as, say, the Greeks or later, the Romans. They didn't necessarily have the same level of discipline or strategic thinking.
So they relied more on overwhelming numbers.
They had a reputation for it, that's for sure. But Gibbon also notes that their armies were often bogged down by this massive baggage train that included, shall we say, non-essential personnel.
I'm picturing this luxurious traveling entourage, musicians, dancers, concubines, not exactly conducive to quick maneuvers on the battlefield.
It does paint a rather vivid picture, doesn't it?
So what were their strengths then? What allowed them to hold their own against the Roman legions?
Their cavalry, the Persian horsemen, were legendary. Gibbon describes them as incredibly skilled, swift, and deadly in their attacks.
Okay, so picture this. Vast open plains, the sun glinting off the armor of thousands of horsemen charging at breakneck speed, the ground trembling beneath their hooves. It must have been terrifying to behold.
Absolutely. And this focus on cavalry, it wasn't just about military tactics, it reflected deeper cultural values. Horsemanship was central to Persian identity.
A symbol of nobility, prestige?
Exactly. It was woven into their art, their stories, their very being.
So, beyond their skill on horseback, what else made the Persians such tough opponents?
Well, they had this fierce warrior ethos, a strong sense of honor and a willingness to fight for their king and their empire. They were defending their homeland, their families, their way of life, and that made them incredibly formidable adversaries.
You combine that with this military prowess, these deep cultural traditions, and then you add in this newly revived Zoroastrian faith. Well, it's a potent mix. It's what allowed them to create such a powerful and enduring empire.
And it's what made this clash between Persia and Rome so epic. These weren't just two armies meeting on a battlefield. It was a clash of cultures, a collision of different worldviews.
And that's what makes this period of history so fascinating. It's not just about battles and conquests. It's about the clash of cultures, the interplay of different beliefs, and the enduring legacy of empires that rose and fell.
And as Gibbon so masterfully shows us, it's a story filled with intrigue, ambition, and this constant struggle for power that has shaped the course of human history.
It really makes you think, what if things had gone differently? What if Artaxerxes had lived a longer life? Or if the Romans had been more successful early on? Could it have changed the course of history?
It's a fascinating question to ponder. Imagine a longer reign for Artaxerxes. He might have solidified his grip on the east and launched even bolder attacks against Rome.
Or maybe if Rome had been less preoccupied with its internal struggles, they could have stopped this Persian resurgence in its tracks.
It highlights how interconnected history truly is. Events in one part of the world have ripple effects, impacting empires and shaping centuries to come. The rise of Artaxerxes and the resurgence of Persia, it wasn't just some isolated event. It had profound implications for both Persia and Rome.
So for our listeners, what's the key takeaway from our deep dive into ancient Persia? What can we learn from all of this?
I think one of the most important takeaways is the importance of understanding the context of history. When we look at figures like Artaxerxes, we have to consider all of the forces at play, the politics, the culture, the religious beliefs that shaped their actions.
It's not just about memorizing names and dates.
Right.
It's about stepping into their world, trying to understand their motivations, their challenges, their victories.
Exactly. History isn't just a collection of facts. It's a tapestry woven from interconnected events, personalities, and ideas. And by studying history, we gain a deeper understanding of our own world and the forces that shaped it.
There's that famous saying, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. But I think it goes beyond just avoiding past mistakes. It's about gaining wisdom, perspective, insights that can help us navigate the complexities of the present.
Well said. History is a vast library of human experience. It's filled with stories of ambition, conflict, cooperation, innovation. By engaging with these stories, we can broaden our horizons, challenge our assumptions, and develop a more nuanced understanding of the world around us.
So, for our listeners who are eager to learn more, where should they go from here? What rabbit hole should they explore?
If you're interested in Gibbon's style and insights, I highly recommend continuing with The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. It's a monumental work, but it's incredibly rewarding.
And if you're intrigued by Zoroastrianism, there are some fantastic books out there that delve deeper into its history, beliefs, and cultural impact.
It's a fascinating religion with a rich and complex history that continues to influence the world even today.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the world of Artaxerxes and the resurgence of Persia. We've journeyed through clashing empires, explored religious fervor, and encountered some thought-provoking leadership philosophies.
We hope you've enjoyed this exploration of ancient history.
And we hope you'll continue to dig deeper, question everything, and learn from the stories of the past. Until next time, keep exploring and keep those minds curious. It really makes you think, what if things had gone differently? What if Artaxerxes had lived longer? Like, what if he hadn't died so young?
It's a fascinating thought experiment. Imagine if he'd had another decade or two to solidify his rule.
Yes, solidify his grip on the East, launch even bolder attacks on Rome.
He might have fundamentally altered the balance of power.
Or what if, on the flip side, Rome had been a little less distracted by its internal problems? Could they have nipped this whole Persian resurgence in the bud?
It's hard to say for sure, but it shows you just how interconnected history is, how events in one part of the world can have ripple effects that span centuries.
Like a butterfly effect.
Exactly. The rise of Artaxerxes and the resurgence of Persia, it wasn't just some isolated event. It set off a chain reaction that would shape the destinies of both empires.
So for our listeners, the history buffs tuning in, what's the big takeaway from all this? What should we be thinking about as we, reflect on Artaxerxes and this whole period of history?
I think one of the key takeaways is the importance of understanding the context of history. When we look at figures like Artaxerxes, we can't just focus on their actions in isolation.
Right.
We have to consider the forces that shaped them, the political landscape, the cultural norms, the religious beliefs that influence their decisions.
It's not just about memorizing names and dates.
Exactly. It's about trying to step into their shoes to understand their motivations, their challenges, their worldview.
Because ultimately history, it's not just a collection of facts and figures.
It's a story.
It's the story of us. It's the story of humanity.
And by studying history, by really delving into these stories, we can gain a deeper understanding of ourselves, of the world we live in, and the forces that have shaped it.
There's that famous quote, right? Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
It's a powerful reminder.
But I think it goes beyond just avoiding the mistakes of the past.
Yeah.
History can provide us with wisdom, perspective, insights that can help us navigate the complexities of the present.
It's a vast library of human experience filled with stories of ambition, conflict, cooperation, innovation.
And by engaging with these stories, we can broaden our own horizons. We can challenge our own assumptions. And ultimately, we can develop a more nuanced, a richer understanding of the world around us.
Exactly.
So for our listeners who are eager to learn more, to kind of keep this exploration going, where should they go from here? What rabbit holes should they jump into?
Well, if you're captivated by Gibbon's style and insights, I highly recommend continuing with The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire.
It's a long read, I'll admit.
It is a bit of a commitment, but it is incredibly rewarding.
And for those who are particularly intrigued by Zoroastrianism,
Oh, yes.
there are some excellent books out there that explore its history, its beliefs, its impact in much greater depth.
It really is a fascinating religion. It has this ancient history, and yet it still resonates today.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of Artaxerxes and the resurgence of Persia. It's been quite a journey. Clashing empires, religious revivals, and some timeless leadership lessons along the way.
It's been a pleasure exploring this chapter of history with you.
And as always, we want to thank you, our listeners, for joining us on this journey.
We encourage you to keep exploring, to keep questioning, to keep learning from the stories of the past.
Because history, well, it's more than just dates and names.
It's a story that's still being written, and we're all part of it.
So until next time, keep those minds curious. Thanks for listening.